Bueno, buen día, disculpen la tardanza, pero tuvimos un problema de conexión con el profesor O'Driscoll. Como pueden ver, ahora estamos conectados, no voy a sacarle más tiempo, así que Gerald, all yours, thank you very much again, and the seminar is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I begin my inquiry into free trade and the classical, what I call the classical case for free trade, with Ludwig von Mises, who is, I'm sure, familiar to most of you. And interestingly enough, he began his analysis in Human Action of how we got free trade with talking about the opponents of free trade. And he did it classes of people. And the two classes of people that he talked about were the landowners, who, of course, the British landowners did not want free trade because, are we all there? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, we are listening, no problem.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. And the landowners, the British landowners, were opposed because they didn't want competition. They wanted to keep the price of food high. There was a system of laws that impeded trade in food, international trade, cross-border trade in food, called the Corn Laws. And there was a long fight to get rid of the Corn Laws. And the manufacturers weren't particularly interested in opening Britain to international trade, freer trade, because that would also mean competition from overseas. So the wonder actually is the laws ever got repealed. The only class of people who benefited were, of course, first of all, workers, ordinary people, consumers, from having cheaper food. And it was, as I said, it was a long struggle, and the classical political economists kind of honed their theory, evolved their theory in the context of this political debate that occurred in the 19th century. I'm quoting Mises. The 19th century success of free trade ideas was affected by the theory of classical economics. And he went on to say that, and this is very interesting and worthy of a discussion in and of itself. Mises went on to say, quote, "It is ideas that make history and not history that makes ideas." That, of course, is a long-running controversy in intellectual history, and he was decisively on one side of it. Mises viewed the case for international trade as a subset of the case for free enterprise, and ultimately as simply an extension of freedom, that it was an essential aspect of freedom that people have free enterprise at home and free and open international competition. And so, again, to quote Mises, "The freedom of man under capitalism was an effect of competition," close quotes. He also, oh yes, I wanted to have a brief, let me go to Human Action. It's almost at the end of the book. Very few are capable of contributing any consequential idea to the body of economic thought, but all reasonable men are called upon to familiarize themselves with the teaching of economics. This is, in our age, the primary civic duty, to study economics. So I would say that the Friedman Hayek Center is following in Mises's footsteps in what it's doing. Now, Milton Friedman stated succinctly what is called the case for unilateral free trade, which is simply a country opens itself up to free trade, which is essentially what Britain did. So, quoting Friedman, "The right course of action for the United States would be unilaterally to get rid of restrictions and say to the world, come and sell your goods. we are delighted to sell to you, close quotes. Now, I was examining some of the resources that we have as scholars, mostly to teach our students about the classical cases for free trade. And I noted that there's ample discussion of this at the Mises Institute website. And Cato has a paper, the updated case for free trade, which was published in 2022. And then Heritage has a very old paper online, which was actually written while I was there by one of my policy analysts, Denise Fronig, and it's The Benefits of Free Trade, a Guide for Policymakers. And that was published in 2000, so 25 years ago. Now, what is the basic argument that's familiar to all of us for free trade is comparative advantage, that the citizens of each country produce what they're most efficient at, what they can produce for the lowest cost. So the main argument for free trade is it lowers the cost of products for the consumer. And now, interestingly, and this is very controversial, this divides advocates of free trade, and that is, does free trade require or lead to the free movements of people? I've always thought that it does, because trade in goods is accompanied by trade in what economists call human capital. That is, the suppliers of goods often need to move to the location of the consumer in the other country in order to supply that good. But even Hayek didn't believe in the unlimited free immigration. So, as I said, this is an issue that divides proponents of free trade. Now, Mercatus Center at George Mason University has a nice piece that 2018 that summarizes the benefits of free trade, addressing key myths. And the succinct benefits, again, are cheaper imports, lowest cost for a given quality of goods, more economic growth because of lower input prices. This is very important and has been overlooked in the debate that we're having in the United States about tariffs, that tariffs don't simply protect domestic manufacturers, but they raise the cost of inputs. And over half of US imports are intermediate goods. They're the things that we make our goods with. And tariffs, therefore, instead of protecting domestic producers, actually disadvantage domestic producers. And I think the Trump administration is still grappling with that reality. Now, some of the myths are the object of trade is exports. President Trump passionately believes that, but the object of trade is imports. That's the benefit of trade to each country, is the cheaper imports. And again, consumer goods plus producer goods. The second is a myth that jobs go overseas. Now, this is a topic in and of itself, the effect of international trade on domestic jobs. But the basic methodological rule for economists is that the market always moves to full employment. The market always moves to full employment. So that if there's job displacement in a US domestic industry, an Argentine domestic industry, if there's job displacement by imports, there are going to be new jobs created to produce something else. So the mix of jobs changes with international trade, but not the total employment. Now, the empirical reality about the loss of manufacturing jobs in the United States over years and decades, going back to the post-World War II period, is a complex one, but the literature has found that most manufacturing jobs disappeared because of automation. That is, to be simple about it, but accurate, people were replaced with robots, machines, automation. People don't put cars together by hand or anything else by and large. So the idea that we're going to have a return to manufacturing jobs is hard to support because most factories don't employ very many people anymore. Most goods are produced automatically by machines. I read an interesting story a few years ago about a General Electric plant in upstate New York, and it described the night shift, and there were just a few workers, and the supervisor didn't even come in. He was at home, and if something came up, I mean, he was observing everything that was happening on his computer, and if something came up that he needed to be there, then he would drive to work. I mean, everything was automatic. So yes, this is interesting. Manufacturing employment in the United States peaked in June of 1979 at 19.6 million people working in manufacturing. Another interesting thing about manufacturing, and this again is another topic that is worthy of its own discussion seminar. Manufacturing employment falls in each recession and never returns to the peak level that it was before the recession. And this is part of a phenomenon of how what seem to be temporary shocks produce permanent changes. And it's a complex story, but basically when companies cut back during a recession, they frequently make changes to how they produce their goods that they didn't have time to make when they were busy supplying output at a maximum rate. And I think that's what causes the transitions often occur during recessions. Now, yes, here we go. So I mentioned that the peak of manufacturing employment was in 1979. In the 1950s, manufacturing jobs accounted for about 30% of the workforce. So there was already a lot of movement toward the service sector by the 50s. So by 1979, manufacturing as a share of total employment was down to 22%. Now, beginning in 1998, there began to be a rebound in the number of manufacturing jobs. That is, despite automation, despite international trade, the growth in manufacturing output led to a growth in workers. The reason for this rebound is not well understood. So the story of manufacturing jobs is a very complicated one. And the idea that protection is going to lead to a return of manufacturing jobs is highly unlikely. As first of all, because as I said, tariffs, non-tariff barriers negatively affect the imports of producer goods, of the means of production, and that hurts domestic producers of goods. And secondly, the automation is inexorable. It's technological progress, and we're just going to keep producing manufacturing goods over the very long run with fewer workers per factory. Now, if there are more factories, there could be more workers, but that would be the only reason. So now I'm ending here with some comments on China, which I'm not going to try to cover extensively. I think it'd be more interesting to do this by question and answer, which I'm going to be ready for in a minute. And that is, even at the time when China was becoming more of a force in international trade, and there were movements to admit it to what was then called the World Trade Organization, and in the United States, to normalize relations with China permanently. For a lot of years, China trade normalization was renewed every couple of years. There was finally a move to make it permanent. And I argued that China was not really ready to be fully integrated into the global trading system. And if they tried, it would wreck the case for international trade. And I believe I was right that that's primarily the problem we have in these discussions of tariffs and trade, is the fact that China doesn't adhere to the rules and has competitive advantage because it basically cheats. It steals intellectual property, for one thing, just one example. So I think China is a big problem for people who make the case for international trade. So with that, I would like to open up the discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor. That was wonderful. And I'm sure that there are many questions. So if anyone has any, of course, you can write those in the Q&A section. Gabriel, is there something you would like to comment?
Yes. Yes, Gerald, you know that many people say that Trump is just negotiating. Of course, I don't think like that, but this is a very common argument lately. So what are your thoughts about it?
What are people calling Trump?
That he's just negotiating. He's just doing business. That's the reason why he
yes,
he's bluffing. I'm going to tax this, and so that's the argument of the many pro-Trump people. In spite, they are in favor of the free trade.
Well, he is a businessman. I mean, that's his background. He's not a politician. That's not his background. I think he's very politically astute, smarter than most of his political opponents, but a businessman. So yes, I mean, he thinks of the economy the way a businessman thinks, which if lower rates or interest rates remember, he's a real estate developer. Lower interest rates are good for real estate developers, so we want lower interest rates. But lower interest rates aren't always good for the economy. They can lead to inflation. And so I think I've actually told someone who's somewhat, closer to him than I am, that he really doesn't want the Fed to lower interest rates at this point, because we'll have another bout of inflation. Now, whether he's just about trading for his own family, a lot of that is going on. It's not attractive, but I think he understands overall that what makes for a strong economy is less government involvement in the economy, less regulation, and more predictability. And it is very difficult, as you know, in Argentina, to rein in government spending. And the Republicans are having a great difficulty about it, but I believe they're on track to do that. So I continue to view Trump positively from the perspective of the economy overall, but not his tariff ideas.
Okay. Flora, is there any other question?
Yeah, there's a question here for you, Professor. It's from Antonio. He's asking, why is free trade important? Due to its utility or as a value itself?
That is an excellent question. I think a lot of, well, there is a moral case for free trade, and Mises and Rothbard believed in the moral case for free trade. And then there's the utilitarian case for free trade, more associated with the Chicago School. But I mean, Friedman always made a moral argument for free trade. It's people's human right. So I think both. And they reinforce each other.
I have another question here. Given your point about automation, what
Yes.
liberal solutions can address fears that trade harms manufacturing jobs and fuels protectionist backlash?
Yes, well, that's a big question. It does. It does fuel a backlash, and we're seeing it right now. I think we just have to accept that as a portion of total employment, manufacturing is just going to keep declining because of employment, because of automation. Now, the total number of jobs, as I said, we had a rebound for 12 years. There was a period of 12 years where manufacturing jobs went up for 11 years out of the 12. So there's going to be these bounces. But the economic growth is inevitably going to be in the service sector. And that's been true for a long time. It was already happening even before World War II. So it's a long run trend. And, you know, most manufacturing jobs weren't that pleasant. I think most office work is more pleasant.
That's a very good point. Another question here. In a world increasingly shaped by nationalism and populism, how could one make the case for example, a US-Argentina free trade agreement? What kind of arguments might even resonate with protectionist leaders such as Trump?
Well, you know, Trump said he wants a trade agreement with Argentina. Now, he didn't specify what the parameters would be, but he recognizes that right now, Argentina and the United States are politically aligned, and I think people around him know they want to reinforce that. When George Bush first came into office, there were a bunch of us that were trying to strengthen ties with Latin America, and I took multiple trips down to Argentina as part of that effort. And I'm very, very happy to see people again, especially with your president, who's not perfect, what political leader is. But I think it's quite an opportunity for these two countries to build stronger ties, and trade is one way to do that.
Gabriel, do you have any other? I thought you did.
Yes, Gerald, in relation to Mrs. Argument in favor of free trade, my concern is that many times he argued in favor of free movement of capital and people, but especially he made this point in 1927 with a very different international situation that we have nowadays, especially security measures and this kind of thing.
Yes.
Many people say, well, you are talking about free movement of people and capital in a very unsecure world. What do you think about it?
Well, I think that you're raising an interesting issue, and it is somewhat problematic. I think the argument for free trade works best for economies that have a strong, rule of law, strong protection of private property, and share, broadly speaking, a set of political values. And the case for free trade was really made by Britain, and they were thinking of Europe and the United States, and of course, their empire, their colonies. And there were countries in the world, of which China is a very good example, that don't fit that model very well. And I think then the case for free trade and free movement of peoples is weaker. And this is a challenge, but I think we have to be realistic. By the way, I wanted to say, when I was talking about Argentina, I would personally like to have complete open borders with Argentina.
Yes, that would be a great advantages for both countries.
Yes.
There's another question here about, this is from Marcelo. He's asking about your opinion about our exportation taxes here in Argentina, which, for example, for soybeans is 33%. What's your opinion about that?
I think it's insane. Yes, it's insane. It's not good. It's not good. It's just a bad idea. It's better. Taxes should be low and uniform and spread across a large base, a large tax base, so that no sector is being heavily taxed. You're an agricultural exporter. Why do you want to tax it?
There's another question from Ignacio. He's asking about what measures do you think would you recommend for social and labor short-term negative effects that might come right after a free trade agreement until more jobs are created?
Yes. First of all, markets anticipate events. So to some extent, new jobs will be created in anticipation of the trade agreement. Trade agreements are not shocks. I mean, they're anticipated. And so I think the market takes care of a lot of that. But I'm not opposed to government supporting retraining. I mean, I think that's a pragmatic solution.
And there's another question here about what do you think countries which have high population, a great number of population, what they will do regarding the increasing use of AI and agents? What do you think about that?
Well, yes. There is a comment on this on AI. AI is not going to take your job. Your job is going to be taken by someone who uses AI and you don't. So we're all going to, well, you're all young. You're all going to have to learn how to use AI. And I have a friend who employs people to write. He produces a daily political newsletter. That's a very difficult thing to do. So he has a whole set of people who write for him. And he just is going to hire a woman full-time to write because she's very proficient in the use of AI. So she is going to benefit. So it's like any other technology. I mean, I have a friend who can't type. Well, you're unemployable if you can't type. And he's very, I mean, he's older, in his 80s, it doesn't matter. But can you imagine in this day and age someone who can't use a computer? Yeah. So we all have to just adapt to this kind of thing. By the way, I'm going to answer a question you didn't ask. I thought I'd get a question on Pope Leo and AI because, you know, the Pope has said he concerned about AI and labor, and that workers their respect will be taken away because of AI. I think he's wrong about this. AI, it's a very complex topic, as I said, but for this woman, and who, by the way, is a single mother of two, who is proficient in the use of AI, this could be the way she maintains a middle-class standard of living for herself and her two children. So yeah. All technology has gainers and losers. The gainers are the people who adopt the technology early. The losers are the people who resist adopting the technology.
And there's one more. I don't know, Gabriel, if you have any other. There's one more in here. It's from Ignacio. He's asking again regarding the positive effects of free trade. However, may that take longer than an incumbent government may have to face in terms of elections? May the market anticipation of a free trade agreement run short of solutions?
This is true for every reform the government has to face, and political leaders have to calculate how fast can they do the reform relative to the term of office. And this is affecting Trump a lot. He knows most of what he can accomplish has to occur in his first year or year and a half. So even though he's president for 4 years, he's got to do a lot this year. And I have friends who say, it's so chaotic, he's doing so many things at once. He's not going to get any of them accomplished unless he does it that way. It's called flooding the field. You throw so many changes out there, your opponents don't have time to react. They're starting to react to your first policy initiative when you've put in a second, then you put in a third, and that's what Trump is doing.
There's another question here, which I think is interesting. It's from Gustavo. It says, the typical argument regarding employees displaced by new technologies is that they will eventually find a job in new activities unknown today, but allowed in the future by the freeing of such labor force. It is politically difficult, though, to digest such argument, even in the face of historical evidence, because it is a trade-off between a fact and an expectation. Government may come to the rescue by increasing public expenditure. In what measure this move affects precisely the market solution mentioned in the first place?
Well, I think this is a way of rephrasing the question that's already been asked. And you need a political entrepreneur. You need somebody who is adept at making these trade-offs in real time. And it will never be perfect, and it will never fit the economist model of perfection. And I respect politicians who have to grapple with these problems. And so you never get the first best solution. You just don't want to end up with the worst solution. And the worst solution comes when you resist change, whether it's technological or trade. Your country, de Tocqueville observed in the 19th century that there were three countries that were potentially going to be the three greatest countries in the 20th century: the United States, Argentina, and Russia. Look how that's turned out. The United States, for all its faults, is adaptable to change.
Yeah. There's another one about the Mercosur and its agreement with the European Union, if you would like to share your opinion on that.
Well, trade blocs are imperfect ways of getting to free international trade. And they, on the one hand, solve some of the problems that come by working with a group that is more homogeneous, such as the EU and Mercosur. But on the other hand, they become trade barriers to the rest of the world. And this is a very good example of how getting to free trade is frequently done very imperfectly. I've never been a fan of either Mercosur or the European Union. And my European friends say that, I mean, the European Union doesn't have free internal trade, and come close. It hasn't, it's failed in its primary goal. So my European friends think that it's going to fall apart.
Gabriel, do you have any other? Of course, Professor, you've been so kind to answer all these questions. Maybe we can have time for one more. And
Yes, I
Okay.
have a very special question, especially for Gerald. Let me come back to 1985, to your great book, Economics of Time and Ignorance, written with Mario Rizzo. You remember that in the introduction, you quote the famous debate between Kirchner and certain vision about the equilibrium always, equilibrium never, equilibrium or equilibrium sometimes. Sometimes would be the Israel Kirchner's position. But I have been talking with certain friends of mine who are very engaged in international trade, and they know this debate, and they sometimes they say to me that even in a complete free international trade with no political barriers and all of that, perhaps many entrepreneurs would be worst in the equilibrium process because they have such a lot of information that they might be confused sometimes. What do you think about it?
I wish that that's what we had to worry about, that we had complete free international trade. And what might its imperfections be? I am not worried. And on the debate between Kerzner and Lachman, recall that Professor Rizzo and I dedicated the book to Lachman. That was our way of expressing our opinion on that issue.
Okay, yes, yes, I remember, yes. It's to do with Lachman, yes, first page, yes. Okay.
We had a meeting in my office when it came time to decide would we dedicate the book to somebody and to whom. And I sat there looking at Mario, and I said, we have to dedicate the book to Ludwig. And he said, yeah, there's no debate. We have to.
Yes, yes. Okay. Good choice. Okay.
okay, so I think that's it. We don't have any other question. And of course, Professor, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for your kindness answering all these questions and sharing your views with us. Gracias a todos por haberse sumado en el día de hoy. And thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you all. It was nice to be with my Argentine friends.
Thanks.
Very special thank you for the Freeman Hayek Center, Gerald. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm proud to be associated with you.
Okay. Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.